So my name is Sinan. You might have seen me on Stack Overflow in ancient times. I haven't been there in a while. But in a previous life, I used to teach economics to undergrad students. But even way before then, sometime around the 80s, maybe 1981, I fell in love with computers. So from that point on, from the end of grade school to the end of high school, I wanted to have something to do with computers in my life. And 1982, my mother and my great aunt helped me get my hands on a ZX Spectrum. I had been playing with a ZX81 before. Before then, I was writing pencil and paper programs. Then came the end of high school in Turkey at the time where I grew up. The college you went to was determined by a two-stage central exam. That is, you didn't apply to colleges, you just took one exam. If you passed that, you were entitled to take the second exam, during which your placement was determined. I was filling in my preferences: computer science, computer science, computer science, electrical engineering, electrical engineering, electrical engineering. You had like room for 36 preferences. I ran out at 20 or something. My mother wanted me to go to business. I hated business. I said, okay, I'll make you a trade. My 21st preference will be economics. Unbeknownst to me at the time, I was also having problems with my appendix. I kept saying it's just tummy aches. And I left the exam early after doing only the math questions. Now, all those engineering departments I had written took students with a combination of math and science. And of course, in those areas, people who do well in math tend to do well in science. They don't do 100% in math and 0 in science, so I couldn't get into any of the engineering ones. But the economics department that I wrote in there, Middle East Technical University, was actually taking students with a combination of math and social studies, and there you have the inverse correlation. People who did really well in math usually didn't do that well in the social studies. People who did really well in social studies didn't really do that well in math. To top it all off, people who do really well in math tend to be in a minority, so I ended up getting accepted there, or being admitted there as my 21st choice among, one of the top scoring people. Now, back then, you didn't have many choices for trying again in Turkey, so I was convinced to give it a shot for a year. It turned out to be a great thing. I fell in love with economics as well. And the fact that I had been tinkering with computers all up to that point was really helpful, because they had these brand spanking new IBM PCs, and somebody needed to write some Fortran or Pascal or do some spreadsheet stuff. Lo and behold, fast forward to 2009, teaching economics, I was starting to get a little tired, so I'm back in the land of computers. Never really left it, but now I'm doing it more as my sole purpose in life. But sometimes I run into situations where a little bit of economic knowledge would really help programmers deal with what they're dealing with. So this talk was motivated by a couple of blog posts I saw on occasion, and the kind of, those agile meetings that are supposed to be stand-up, but everybody's sitting around on a couch, where everybody's supposed to be telling people what they're doing, but they're just mumbling stuff, where everybody's supposed to be talking about what's blocking them, but they're just really making up, okay, this is why I can't move on, kind of stuff. After a few too many of those kinds of meetings, I thought maybe, talking a little bit about basic economic concepts might open the floor for more interesting, sort of reflective kind of discussion. And the one thing when I was teaching economics that I saw is a lot of people who are really smart take just one economics class in college and they're done with it. One of the reasons for that is your Econ 101 kind of class tends to be extremely geared towards the lowest common denominator. And again, as my experience shows me, the lowest common denominator in intra-college classes tend to get confused if there's a decimal point in a division involved anywhere. So when you're geared towards that, really smart people tune out. They say, oh, there's a couple of straight lines, a couple of equations with a couple of variables. I can do this in my sleep, and there's really not much to it, and they move on. But there's much more to the basic stuff. I'm going to later on give an example of a question that was asked to a couple of hundred economics PhDs from top programs in the United States. This is the kind of thing that, one would really include it in an in-class quiz, 5-minute quiz at the end of class. Here's a question, what's the correct answer, to people who are taking economics for the first time. But 80% of these economics PhDs failed to answer it correctly. So there's much more than the actual arithmetic that goes into economics. A lot of people who teach economics come to economics not from undergrad, but they come to it because they are really smart, mathematically capable, and to do grad level study in economics you need to be mathematically very, very capable. But they've never thought about what goes on in the background. They specialize in grad school in either solving stuff or running large regressions or stuff like that, and then they tend to ignore the basics. So what's economics? And I'm not, trying to start a big debate here or anything, but I'm going to ignore a whole swath of economics that solely exists to provide people with stable jobs in the government sector. That's the macro stuff. What is the right interest rate? I don't know. Nobody does, but you have to write those reports so somebody in the government will actually pay you. Because what the politicians want to do is to have a few people tell them X% is the right Federal Reserve interest rate, and if you don't do that, all hell is going to break loose. The other guys have their own team of economists, and they do battle. That's my sort of jaded look at macroeconomics. There's a little transcription of a mimeographed parody post or parody article that my friends and I fell in love with sometime in mid-1995, which talks about why are macro guys so grumpy. Just macro guys and I don't get along. But if you search for why are macro guys so grumpy, you'll see why. Anyway, economics is constrained optimization. What does constrained optimization mean? Well, you want stuff. To get stuff, you need to do things. Things have costs. You have finite amount of resources you can allocate to doing things to get the stuff that you want. So therefore, you need to choose the best way of doing things. This is where the usual, usual rant about what economists mean by best and what engineers mean by best come into play, because the conflict lies in the fact that the best is not globally defined. That's basically the whole tug of war between, Marxists and the rest of us. They have the labor theory of value. They think the value of everything can be figured out by the amount of labor that went into it, no matter how many iterations of investment, etc., has happened. And therefore, everything has an objective value. The stupid watch has objective value. The plastic cup, according to them, has objective value. But for the rest of us, nothing has objective value. The value of everything is in the eye of the beholder. Yes?
Just wondering what the constrained optimization is. It sort of seems like if there were no constraints,
you can't optimize.
Would sort of be optimized already. Yeah.
No, you can't. That's the other thing I'm going to get at. Okay. Usually, when you look at tech discussions, you see the word used. You see the word optimized used, but you see no constraints. And optimized to them means generally as fast as possible or as small as possible, but the actual objective is not presented. The proper way of putting that would be as fast as possible while still keeping my electricity bills at this, my cooling requirements at this, and the cost of constructing the, So there needs to be, if you're going to optimize, there needs to be some kind of constraint. Sure, there are functions with global optima and all of that stuff, but the interesting optimization problem is when you have constraints. Because when you have constraints, you have trade-offs. And again, which trade-offs are preferable when and where depends on the conditions as well as who's making the decision. If you're building a road in Nepal, this is an example by one of my favorite professors, Robert Frank. If you ever feel curious and you have access to JSTOR or something, search for an article called If Homo economicus Could Choose, Would He Choose a Utility Function with a Conscience? That's one of the things that actually convinced me that economics was actually much more interesting than I had previously thought. The trade-offs involved while when you're building a road in Nepal are different than the trade-offs involved while, if you're building a road in Pennsylvania. It feels like road construction in Pennsylvania never ends. The same strip of road always has the same barrels, regardless of season. Yes. Whereas in Nepal, they actually do build the roads eventually. So, trade-offs come from a confluence of, or a coming together of constraints and objectives. And objective, I'm using that loose word here. The universal objective in economics is to maximize the net benefit, maximize the difference between the total benefit you get from something and the total cost of doing something. Everybody does this. It's not an evil capitalist thing. And that's what a lot of people get hung up on. The word for this, as we're going to see in a second, the word for this is profit. The value you derive from, the difference between the value you derive from doing something and the cost of doing it is profit. And everybody maximizes profit. Nobody says, I am purposefully trying to get the least amount of what I want at the most possible cost. Everybody says, I'm trying to get the most of what I want at the least possible cost to me. Leave aside the meanings of those words, but in common language, nobody will say, I'm trying to pay the most for the least. Where do constraints come from? They come from things that are outside of us and things that are inside of us. So when I'm programming, I have a bunch of internal constraints, right? My mental capability, the way I think. A whole lot of those things were determined way before I even touched a computer. That's my human capital. You accumulate human capital by investing in it, and by also virtue of whatever genetic environment endowment you were born with, the kind of luck element. But then, other things happen along the ways. Now, there are three words that are almost always used interchangeably out there that in economics all mean very, very different things. And it's useful to think about how these things have different meanings. I think the whole world makes a lot more sense if you actually think in the real meanings of these words. There's the word price. Price is what you pay upfront for something. You go to the grocery store, there's a price label for those apples that you see in the stand, and it says $3.49 a pound, and that's the price of those apples. You know the saying. Is it about economists? An economist is a person who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. Yeah. The truth there is, of course, is not that derogatory. It's, I don't know the value of that pound of apples to you. The basic judgment is that apples don't have any objective value that exists beyond the valuation placed by the person who intends to consume those apples. The apples by themselves, without somebody's consumption, have no value. Which brings us to the word value. You go to the groceries, you go to, Home Depot, and it says a $200 value. According to whom? Now $10. Why? If it's really worth $200, you would be able to sell it for $200. Clearly, it's now priced at $10 because nobody's buying the thing at $200. Let me judge that value. Now, the reason I bought this shirt is because the value to me of this particular shirt was greater than the price somebody was charging for that shirt. And the reason this shirt was in that store at the time was because the price the store paid to the person who's supplying, the firm who's supplying this shirt, the price they paid to them was less than what they thought they could sell it for, the cost to them. We come to the word cost. There's nothing wrong with saying my car cost, $10,000. to me, I paid, let's say, $10,000 for that car. But it didn't cost $10,000 to produce. If it's a brand new car, unless there is no free disposal, and there is no free disposal of cars, but let's think about something that you could freely dispose of. Let's forget that for a second. Let's assume there's free disposal of cars. Let's assume that stupid Cash for Clunkers program is still running. And you can just turn in your car, no questions asked, and somebody destroys it for you. But of course, that's not free to society. There's a cost to that as well. Nobody would sell me something for more than what it cost them to produce. What does it mean for something to cost an X amount of dollars to produce? Well, there's the usual stuff. There's metal that goes into the car. There's paint. There's computer programs. There's gauges. There's seat leather. All sorts of things going to. And they all have prices in the market. But there's one more cost into making that car. And that's the opportunity cost. That's the person or persons who organized the production of that car. They could have done something else with their time. And that's what's usually forgotten. They chose to produce that car and sell it at a $10,000 price point because the cost, including the material cost, plus the benefit they lost from not being able to do something else, that all came below the price at which they could sell that car. They had a net benefit that is greater than every other alternative net benefit available to them. So opportunity cost is simply the value of the most preferred foregone alternative. I derive a certain amount of benefit from being here. There's no price to this. There's no dollar sign that says, Sinan derives, $1,500 worth of benefit from being able to stand here and talk to like-minded people and have fun. But there is a value to me. You could set up an experiment trying to figure that value out. Right? You offer me $10 to stop talking, $20 to stop talking. But at some point, I'm going to stop talking. And that's the point where you figure out what the value to me of being here was. That's the sense in which you can put a dollar figure on pretty much everything. You can figure out, hypothetically, we don't care too much, but hypothetically, you could figure out what dollar amount would convince people from doing something, or would convince them to do something, and if that willingness to pay, willingness to accept, as we call it, are the same, then we have figured out a valuation for that thing. So that's what opportunity cost is, the value of the most preferred foregone alternative. Nothing else matters. The fact that I could have also gone penguin hunting during this time doesn't matter, because it's not my most preferred alternative to this. Only the cost of the most preferred, the value of the most preferred alternative matters in terms of figuring out opportunity cost. So here's that example that was asked of 200 economists with PhDs from top economics programs. This is at the Economics Job Market annual Allied Social Science meetings. I think it was 2005. So you want a free ticket to see Eric Clapton in concert, but you can't resell the ticket. The TSA enforces it. Your name's on the ticket. You have to show 3 forms of government ID to get in, so you can't really resell. Well, that's what they want for these baseball games these days. Yeah, it's a national security situation. I'm exaggerating, but there's all that, cramping down on people who try to resell tickets online.
Important we live in fear.
It is, Otherwise, what would life be like?
How will they control us?
Exactly. So there, Bob Dylan is also performing on the same night. I didn't write the question. I'm familiar with these guys, but I do realize I'm probably older than a lot of people. If you want to see Dylan at a concert, you have to pay $40 for the ticket. On any given day, you would be willing to pay up to $50 to see Dylan. Assume there are no other costs of seeing either performer. Based on this information, what is the opportunity cost of seeing Eric Clapton?
Are you asking the question?
Yes.
I say D.
I'm asking D.
Because the value to you of Dylan is $50. Yeah. And that's what you're giving up. I say C.
The value to me of seeing Dylan is 50, and that's what I'm giving up. So right-hand corner says D. Somebody said C. Why?
I don't know, it just made sense to me. We need to go see them before, I don't remember the definition exactly of what's opportunity.
It's the value of the most preferred foregone alternative, which the most preferred part doesn't matter here. We're setting it up as these two.
Cost is $40, so that's it.
The ticket price is 40, so that's it. Yes.
Could you just say the answer, because then I don't want to guess the wrong one.
Well, that's okay. This is sort of, 200 top PhD economists from top schools, and 80% of them got it wrong. So there's no shame in getting this wrong.
So you said that it's the most preferred thing.
Well, don't get hung up on that because there's only two alternatives here. Don't get hung up on the most preferred. Yes.
I say A0 because I'm going to see Bob Dylan, not Eric Clapton.
It's the most you're willing to spend on it. That's your value.
What do people maximize? Yes. Okay. So there is some agreement on it's the most you're willing to spend on it. I saw one more hand. I'm having fun. I love this. Yes.
I think it's B.
And why is that?
Because your difference is $10 and you can afford $50.
We maximize profit. The benefit to you from going to see Bob Dylan is $10. You value it at 50, but the cost is 40. That's why when people focus on maximizing market share, those companies generally go belly up because profit, the amount of money you get to keep from your operations, is what keeps the company going. The value to you of seeing Dylan is 50, but you have to pay 40 to see him. So what you're giving up is $10 benefit if you go see Eric Clapton. The Eric Clapton thing only matters insofar as if you value seeing Eric Clapton by more than $10, say the value, if the value you placed on seeing Eric Clapton was $11, then as a person who's maximizing net benefit, you should go see Eric Clapton. Does that make sense? So it's kind of, by having that free alternative there, it throws you sort of, did I see a hand there? No. I don't want to miss any questions. This is just general economic style. We like interruptions. We don't like questions at the end. We just like questions to come whenever they are. So feel free to just butt in.
B was the right answer?
B, $10 is the right answer because that would be the net benefit from actually seeing Bob Dylan in concert to you, given these parameters. You would have to spend the $40. You have to pay something to be able to get that benefit. The Eric Clapton thing is not really relevant to the correct answer to this question, other than the fact that if you later tell me that you saw Clapton, then I know you valued Clapton at more than $10. Not more than 50, but more than $10. Oh, come on. I have this thing. Sorry. I don't want people to change my password if I walk away slightly, so it's on a hair trigger.
So I want to see a bar chart of what the 200 PhDs thought.
I can send you a link if you email me. But a lot of people, I think, got stuck at the A and D alternatives, but my memory might be incorrect. I had to look this up again. This was mentioned in a New York Times blog by, again, one of my favorite professors, Robert Frank, who was the main reason I was extremely excited when I got accepted to Cornell. Everybody else rejected me, but Cornell said yes. And I was extremely happy because his article back in 1987 about if Homo economicus could choose, would he choose a utility function with a conscience? That was one of the things that convinced me that economics was actually worth studying. He mentioned this in a New York Times blog as well, and that might be. And he does these kinds of anecdotes really well. One of my hardest TA assignments was for him because all the students would love him, and then at the end of the year I would get these evaluations. Bob Frank is beautiful, wonderful, exciting, fun class, but Sinan sucks. Because he does these anecdotes really, really well, and then you have to go grade the quizzes. Nobody likes the guy who grades the quizzes. But anyway, then I started teaching my class and using some of that material. The key factor here is subjectivity. The valuation of which singer is better than the other is a subjective matter. valuation of what is the best thing you can do with your time is subjective. There is no objective measure there. If you think your friend is wasting his time, of course, this happens. I do it all the time. I procrastinate. I have the slacker thing here. Maybe getting stuck on watching reruns of New Jersey Housewives is not the best use of your time when stuff needs to be done. You can try to convince people, you're not really valuing time correctly, etc. But the subjectivity you can't avoid. Ultimately, the person who's making the decision is the person who's responsible for that value judgment. Now, this is where all the smart students in the classroom would just fall asleep. But I want to also arithmetically show you something real quick. Suppose there are alternative things you can do with your time, x and y. Each unit of doing x takes tx amount of time. Each unit of doing y takes ty amount of time to complete. Usually in an economics class, these would actually be price of x, price of y. But I wanted to emphasize this reasoning is not just limited to the price of apples and price of oranges, but any arbitrary kinds of things. You have total amount t available to do these tasks. Therefore, your constraint is time it takes to do 1 unit of x times the number of units of x you want to do. Time it takes to do a unit of y times the number of units of y you want to do must be less than or equal to total time. Time you want to spend with your family, time you have to spend at work, they must add up to less than total available time in a day. What is the objective? The objective is also different for everybody. There's consumption, there's stuff you like to do with your family that costs money, and then you have a wage rate that determines how much you get paid for time you give up with your family. To be able to work and actually make that money. Trade-offs come from where the objectives meet the constraints. The opportunity cost, in this case, comes from that nice little triangle this constraint would draw into space. There we have it. If you spent all your time doing y, you would get t over ty amount of y. If you spent all your time doing x, you would get t over tx amount of time. 99% of undergrads get confused that the slope has x in the numerator. That's your opportunity cost of doing an extra unit of x in terms of units of y. If you want to do 1 more unit of x, you would have to spend tx amount of time on that. Divide that by ty. That gives you how many units of y you would give up. That's the opportunity cost in terms of time of doing 1 more unit of x. Now, the value of those time units is different for everybody. It was good when Bill Gates was actually working on an income-generating activity. I would just say, Bill Gates's time is valued much more highly than my time, because by him spending his 1 hour on an income-generating activity, he's generating much more income than I do. That trade-off, what it takes to do x divided by what it takes to do y, is key to a lot of conflict in life, work, and everything else. Worth emphasizing, can't optimize without an objective. And the problem is, what is the objective? Now, another wonderful article that convinced me again that economics is worth studying is the F connection, families, friends, and firms. And in that trio of families, friends, and firms are the most deliberately chosen, most voluntary form of human organization that exists. You do not, I'm over time, I'm sorry. You do not choose who you're with, who your family is, and your friends have to do with childhood. What is the objective of a firm? Firm's objective is to maximize the net benefit to the owners of the firm. 30 seconds, JT. That is profit. When you get mismatch between the objectives of the firm and objectives of the programmer, you get conflict. And I think the way an economist looks at the Agile Manifesto is trying to figure out a way of communicating between the owners of the firm and the programmers, the value to the owners of doing certain things, and the cost to programmers of doing those things, so you can maximize the net benefit, the difference between the value, the total value it generates for the firm, minus the total cost of actually achieving that for the firm. These are practical micro concerns, and that is, my look at Agile as an economist. That's why those meetings, those cards are important. I will shut up now. If you have questions, I'll be out there. Thank you very much for your patience.